Hello my friends, welcome back to my channel. Okay, so today I have a single review video, which I think I've only ever done maybe once before. I mean, to be fair, I have done vlogs where I only read one book, but this is just a single review video for Magnolia Parks by Jessa Hastings. You may have noticed this has kind of taken over the book world, or at least the romance book world, by storm recently. I feel like everybody has just barely started talking about it and it's everywhere. So I first heard of this book from Sam Reads a Little. She posted the cover in her Instagram story and I messaged her and I was like, what is that? What is that? Because my first thought was, is that like a graphic novel? This seems very out of character for Sam. And she told me that it was basically like British Gossip Girl and a romance. And I was like, huh, interesting. And then I kind of didn't really think too much more about it. Like, I looked at it and I was curious, I was interested, but you know, there wasn't an audiobook and I just wasn't, I don't know, like that Gossip Girl isn't really my thing. And then I heard Sam talk about it, and she was talking about how beautiful the writing was and how angsty it was, and then literally every single person that I have seen or heard talk about it comments on the beautiful writing and the angst, and like, those are my two buzzwords. If you tell me that it's high angst and that it has beautiful writing, I'm probably gonna read it. So I went into this a little bit nervous because I know my friends love it, and I feel like sometimes I can be a little negative about some books that my friends love, and I don't like being like that, but I do like to be honest. And anyway, so I was nervous about it, and I thought, I'm gonna just read it quietly. I'm not even gonna put it on my Goodreads shelf as currently reading. I'm just gonna keep it to myself, and I'm not gonna say a word, and then if I don't like it, I can just DNF it and nobody will know. But everybody was talking about it in reading sprints and everything, and I was starting to get to the point where I was like, I may not be 100% sold on this book, but I'm gonna finish it and then I'm gonna talk about it. So that's where we are. I finished the book. I just barely finished it last night, and I have some things to say about it. So I don't know, I'm gonna try and keep this video short, and it's gonna be spoiler free. I am going to talk a little bit in depth about what the book is about, but I'm going to avoid major spoilers. So, this is a contemporary book. It is a romance. I feel like calling it a romance, it is a romance in that the entire driving force of this book, the plot, is a romance between BJ and Magnolia Parks. But the first book definitely ends on a cliffhanger. This is not what I would consider, it doesn't follow a formula of a romance, as in, it doesn't have the typical breakup, get together, happily ever after. Like, this is, I would say this is outside of the bounds of, I don't even know that I want to say that. It's a romance. It's not a book ends happily ever after type of romance, you know what I mean? So basically Magnolia and BJ, they are British. They're very wealthy. He's kind of like an Instagram, social media. His family has money, and so that's his job. She works for a gossip rag. Her family is incredibly wealthy. Like, Elton John is her godfather. Her dad is actually, he helps like produce music, so there are constantly like name dropping these big famous rappers and musicians like Post Malone. So I struggle with rich girl characters. Okay, we're not going to talk about my feelings. We're still talking about the plot. I'm sorry. I'm trying to keep my thoughts organized on this. So basically, BJ and Magnolia, they know each other as kids. They kind of are raised together. They're constantly in each other's home. They're not really raised together, but they grow up together. They're constantly in each other's homes. And of course, they end up developing feelings for one another from the time when they are very, very young, like teenagers, young teenagers. And they fall deeply in love. They are happy for those early teenage years, and then a choice is made by BJ that tears them apart and sort of results in this breakup, and then this vicious cycle of wanting to get together, wanting to trust each other again, and then getting hurt by either bringing up the past, a past wound, something that causes pain, and then they sort of retreat and they fall into these self-destructive behaviors that they have. And a lot of times for BJ that involves drug abuse and other women, and for Parks, Magnolia, a lot of times that involves her shopping or her not necessarily using, but finding comfort in men to make BJ jealous, but not in a physical way, if that makes sense. I'm dying as I'm trying to talk about this plot. The book is just a continuation of that cycle where they feel this complete draw and pull towards one another. It's often, like, this book is full of metaphors. We're going to talk about the writing in a minute, but it's often referred to as magnets. They just cannot stay away from each other. They want to feel that comfort and that safety that they do feel with one another, but it's been damaged and tarnished, and it's not that safe place anymore, but they're continuously looking and seeking to find that with each other because they really are each other's refuge, even though they are also each other's major source of pain and trauma, essentially. And I just found that to be completely fascinating because, like, you couldn't help but hope that this time they were gonna find something and they were gonna work on it. They were not gonna bring up past hurts. They weren't gonna catch each other in hurting each other today. Like, she catches him with other women several times, and he sees her with, you know, a man and gets his feelings hurt. Anyway, so that's basically the plot of the book, is just this circular plot of them constantly wanting to be with each other, wanting to trust each other, having this glimpse that maybe this time they will, and then that's pretty quickly proven not to be the case, whether it's a past hurt that comes up, whether it's a current hurt that comes up. Something causes them to not make it together. So really what kept me compelled, and what I think might keep you compelled, what I feel like is what keeps people compelled in this, is that you feel this pull towards them. You feel that they are meant to be together, and you want them to be, but they just keep, like, missing so often. So the big plot point in the book, the big question, is Magnolia wants to know why he cheated on her, which is what resulted in them breaking apart in the beginning. It's off page, you don't see that on page, but that's the driving force of what keeps them not quite getting back together, because of the pain that's surrounding around that and the lack of trust and the hurt that has been caused by that betrayal. But every time that Magnolia and BJ would have interactions with one another, she would bring that up and she would be like, who did you cheat on me with and why? Like, her big question is, why did you do this? And so that makes the reader have that as their big question for the whole book too. So you're constantly wondering, is there going to be this big reveal that is going to bring Magnolia peace and therefore us peace as readers? Is it going to be enough for us to still want them to be together? And if you make it to the end of this book, where the final plot happens, which results in a cliffhanger, you are at the point where you probably want them to be together more than anything else, because she has done such a great job, this author, of really making you feel that pain and that hurt, but also right side by side with that, she makes you feel this strong desire to just be together. Because the way that this book is written, it makes you really feel like the only way that either one of them are going to get relief is if they either completely sever their relationship and they try and find a way to move on, or they finally work things out and they are together, no matter that it's toxic and painful and all that other good stuff. So you're hoping that there's going to be some type of resolution there. And because it's a romance, you believe, or at least I believed, that it was going to end up in them being together. So this isn't the end of their story. There is a second book which follows different characters that you meet in this book, and then the third book goes back to BJ and Magnolia. So that's the basic plot of the book. Plot, loosely. Again, like, I do think there is a plot, because that's the driving force of this, is you're trying to see, is he going to tell her why he cheated on her and who he cheated on her with, so that she can either choose to accept that and move forward, or to accept that and break things off finally. And there even does come a point in the book where you see that she's kind of questioning with, do I need to know this information? Can I live with it without that? And it was just really fascinating. I found this to be very readable, very compelling. I don't know that I want to say readable, because I want to talk about the writing here in just a minute. I found their story to be extremely compelling. I had to know what was going to happen with them. This book is often referred to as rich people drama, and it absolutely is, right? Magnolia is very wealthy, but she never really came across to me as a spoiled rich girl. I mean, spoiled, yes. Bratty, Yeah, at times, but I also found myself being very sympathetic with her, and I think that's because you see so much of what she's gone through with her family, and specifically with BJ, while she still has this hope in her heart. Like, the entire book, she has this hope that whatever happens, they're gonna work through this. Her and BJ will eventually be together. So it feels a little bit like, I was thinking about this earlier, and I was trying to figure out, like, why did I become so obsessed with this story? I haven't even told you my star rating. I will in a minute. Why did I become so obsessed with this story? All I wanted to do was read it. When I had to put it down, I was thinking about it. I found it to be just like, it just had a chokehold on me. And a book hasn't had that effect on me in a very long time. Honestly, I feel like I get this way about certain things. Like, I got this way about Stranger Things Season 4. I just recently watched Death Note for the 3rd time, and I became obsessed with that. And that's how I feel about Magnolia Parks. So I feel like even if the story isn't 100% satisfying to me, as in there's tragedy, I wish things had been handled differently, I wish the ending had been different, I still find the characters and the situations that they're in to be so completely compelling, and I feel a lot of sympathy towards these characters, and I see their points of view, and I think that that is a really great accomplishment that the author was able to do, because there, on the surface, when you're describing this book, it sounds like he is unredeemable, and it sounds like this is going to be painful, and it is painful. Like, this book was pretty, like, heart-wrenching to read. But it was also completely gripping. So my star rating for this, I kind of wavered back and forth. Is it a 3-star? Is it a 4-star? For most of the book, I was going to give this 3 stars. I feel like if this was going to be a 2 or 1-star book, I wouldn't have finished reading it. Usually those ratings are reserved for books that I have, like, major problems with the writing, I have major problems with the storytelling, I have major problems with the book, and that's not what happened here. So the more that I read this book, by the time I got to the end, I was like, this is firmly a 4-star read for me. I found myself deeply enjoying the story. I also was very impressed with the writing, although it wasn't perfect and I do have some critiques there. And I just, overall, this as a debut book, I was deeply impressed with it. I feel like this author, her writing skill, the way she puts words together, the way that she uses words to convey emotion, I think that she has a lot of potential. Like, a lot of potential. I don't know that I have read a debut book where I have felt so deeply like this is a talented author. Like, she has a lot of potential to grow and become, like, really, really great. So I was very impressed with that, and I am going to read everything that she writes. I think that she has so much untapped potential. This book feels very raw. It doesn't feel very polished, and I love it for that reason. I feel like if she had I know she has had edits, I'm not sure exactly how much this is self-published. I do feel like if she had a really hard editor, they would have pared it down a lot. And I keep asking myself, would I have enjoyed it as much if a lot of the writing, a lot of what makes this feel so unique and so different, would I have still enjoyed it as much? And I don't really know about that, honestly, because let's talk about the writing for a minute. The writing in this book is really unlike anything that I have read before. That's not entirely true. It's unlike anything that I have read in a very long time. I feel like when people describe the writing as beautiful, that's a fair analysis. The writing in here does at times feel very heavy-handed, but not in a way that feels clunky. It doesn't feel amateurish. It feels like she is really doing a good job at choosing words, but I do feel like sometimes she chooses too many. There is really not a page in this 600-something, 580, I'm not exactly sure how many pages it has. I read it on Hoopla, and my Hoopla said it had 660 pages. But there is not a page in this book that is not full of metaphors, that is not full of description, and that is not full of talking about love while using love as a descriptor. And that's something that I wish she had done differently when she's talking about how love makes her feel. There are a few phrases she used, like, he breathes love out, it feels like loving him. I wish she had used something else to describe that feeling of love, because that's really what you're looking for, is what does love feel like? And she's used metaphors so well in other places that I feel like she could have done that. Anyway, that's kind of a minor complaint. So overall, I feel like I prefer lyrical prose. Lyrical prose is something that has beautiful, almost poetic feeling to the word, that is descriptive, but it's not descriptive in every single sentence, on every single page. It doesn't have metaphors all over the place. It's used a little sparingly. So when you come across lyrical prose, it has this feeling of very deliberate word choices, and it doesn't have an excessive amount of words used to describe that. Whereas I feel like purple prose is sort of the opposite. So I do feel like at times the prose in this book, not at times, I feel like if I were to be really harsh, I'm having a hard time being really harsh because I did enjoy it a lot, but the writing in this book leans towards purple prose. There's an excessive amount of metaphors. There's an excessive amount of description, particularly in the eyes, and that is something that is very typically a new writer problem, is that their go-to description for characters' emotions is always the eyes, and that's very apparent here. She describes the eyes in sometimes very similar ways, some ways that you've read on every single page before in the book, and sometimes in very like odd ways that sound a little bit awkward. Like she talks about eyes falling, or eyes, you know, there's a particular phrase that she uses, eyes pinch. She uses that so much in the book, and I wish that she had used her considerable skill to describe other ways of conveying emotion rather than just the eyes. So like I said, I hope this is something that she can grow out of, because I know that this is very common for new writers, and this is her debut book, to focus on the eyes because so much emotion is told through eyes. It's very common to have that happen, but when it is sort of an excess, when that is what is mainly used to describe the emotion, it does tend to read or give the signal of this is not a fully developed writer, and that's okay. That's not a fault. Like, I still loved the book. I don't know if I loved it. I loved it, okay? Like, look, I loved it. It's not without its flaws. I really enjoyed it. 4 stars. But that was an issue I noticed with the writing. Like, when I first started reading this, I was being very critical about the writing because there were just so many descriptions about eyes falling, eyes catching, eyes, just constantly. There were so many metaphors, constantly, always. And the problem with that isn't that the way she described them was poor, it's that she uses them so much that they start to lose their power and their effect. And so when you see it, you sort of become blind to it, and it doesn't have the impact that it could otherwise have. Now, because this book was very emotional, and I think she did an excellent job of conveying that emotion, emotionally painful, I think that she did use other ways to describe things, but that was just something that I noticed. It seems to be her writer's tick, is how she describes eyes. So I'm hoping that that sort of comes across in a different way. And again, like the metaphors nonstop. I'm going to read you a real quick example of what I mean when I'm talking about how she writes, because I think that this specifically is a really good example of what you're going to find in pretty much every single page of this book. So this is from Magnolia's point of view. This is a book written in 2 different points of view, so you have Magnolia's and then you have BJ's. Magnolia says, I blink that I miss him, and the turned down edges of his mouth tell me he misses me too. And I have a feeling running right through, like being tucked tightly into your bed at night, like a safe certainty that I will major in the minor details of him forever. I will never unlearn the shape of his mouth. So I felt like that was such a good example of what you're going to find in this book as far as writing, because it talks about eyes. Eyes are described in there. She has some metaphors in there talking about tucking into bed at night. She's also using the metaphors of major and minor details in there. And then she also has something that I think is something she tends to do, where the description or the writing comes across a little awkwardly when she ends it with, I will never unlearn the shape of his mouth. I think that what she is doing with her writing is very unique, and I think that largely it works, but it also feels like a little rough around the edges. It feels a little bit like she's a little chaotic, and this is something else that I want to point out, is because this is a dual perspective point of view book, we have Parks, Magnolia Parks, her point of view, and then we also have BJ. So when I first started reading this, I was only reading from Parks' point of view. And something else that this author does is she has quite a lot of run-on sentences, a lot. And that was also something I was noticing in the beginning is that there's very little use of commas, and I found that to be pretty distracting because there was no pause when you were supposed to have a pause. And anyway, again, I'm nitpicking because that's what I do, okay? But I remember I was messaging Jesson about this book, and I said, this is very interesting to me. What she's doing here is she is having these run-on sentences in Magnolia's point of view. And then when she comes to a scene that is causing Magnolia distress, then her sentences get very choppy. And she's got like maybe 2 or 3 words in her sentences. And I really thought that was very clever use of writing and the use of pacing in your sentences. And I told Jesson, I'm like, if this is a stylistic decision, if this is something that she did on purpose for Magnolia's point of view, I'm going to be very impressed. So I was looking for that when I got to BJ's point of view. And I do think that that was something that wasn't perfect here because BJ has that same tendency to over-metaphor things like Magnolia did in that example that I just read. BJ also uses a lot of metaphors. He also has that same tendency to have run-on sentences and short, choppy sentences when he's in a moment of distress. And I do like that the author used those techniques to convey that emotion, and I think it was effective. I just wish there had been a little bit more division in those two things from Magnolia to BJ. BJ still had a distinct voice, but because both of those stylistic choices were in both of their points of view, that to me read as the authorial voice rather than the character's voice. So I'm curious to read the next book to see if she still does that. I haven't read it at this point. I just barely finished the first one. I do definitely plan to continue, because I want to see just how much of these new characters, Daisy and Christian, who are in the second book, how much of that are they going to have that same tendency in their thoughts? Are there going to be run-on sentences contrasted with short, choppy sentences? Is that just a way that Jessa Hastings writes, and that's how she chooses to convey emotion? But something else that I think was really interesting how she did that with her writing in Magnolia's point of view is this book is first person, but it is very, 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 very much a stream of consciousness type of book. You are getting their thoughts in the moment, you are getting their reflections, you're getting their memories. It's everything that they are thinking in this book. And I think that makes it both very compelling and makes it a little bit difficult. I think that could be difficult for some people to get behind because you're getting this contrast in their thoughts. It's never a distinctly pure writing style. Both of their thoughts are a little bit chaotic, and so you're getting this contrast with the run-on sentences, the metaphors, the descriptions, the way they talk about eyes. And that's another thing, is that both of the characters describe eyes in the very same way. And I would have liked, because it is so much internal dialogue that you are reading in here, you're getting every little thought that they have, everything that they're analyzing and thinking about. They both tend to use the same descriptions for eyes and metaphors and things like that. So I would have liked to see a little bit more distinction between the two. I think that would have been more effective at conveying that these are more distinct characters rather than this is Jessa Hastings' writing style when she's doing an internal monologue, stream of consciousness type of narrative. So I used an example of something that I feel like was maybe, and again, like, I'm critiquing the writing because I enjoy doing that, but I also want to emphasize that I feel like this author has a huge amount of potential. Like, huge amount of potential. I am very invested in her career. I definitely want to continue reading her books, but and again, I'm critiquing it. This is a debut book, and I think it's a very impressive debut book. I think this is really, honestly, one of the most impressive debut novels that I've ever read. And like I said, like, I am definitely obsessed with this book, okay? I, like, need to go buy merch. I don't know. Their romance is extremely toxic, no doubt. Everyone says that it's toxic. It absolutely is. It is very much a look at what love is like, and how difficult it could be for people to leave that love behind, particularly when they fall in love so young, and being with that person was a formative part of their life and their personhood and who they are. That's extremely difficult to divorce from your life. And every time that Magnolia would make choices where she would maybe forgive BJ or whatever, I kept finding myself relating with her and feeling sympathetic with her and understanding the choices that she made. And I think that for as much as this book is rich people drama in a world that most people are never going to understand, I found it to be very relatable in the way that she thought about love and the way that she thought about BJ and the way she thought about her family. I just really found her to be an enjoyable character who was interesting to read about, and I was very invested in her journey. So I gave you an example of some of the writing that I felt showed what you were getting into with things that I think could be nitpicky about if you're nitpicky about your writing, and I wanted to give you a taste of what maybe that purple prose looked like. But now I want to read you a part of something that I considered to be a little bit more spare and a little bit more concise, and I felt was a bit more effective at conveying the emotion she was going for. So I do want to say this book has trigger warnings, obviously for cheating, and it definitely has a trigger warning for drug abuse and overdose. So this is a line that I want to read to you. This is a paragraph. I'm going to break it up so I don't do any spoilers. But this is from Magnolia's point of view. She says, "You think big things like that change a person on the spot, but the changes that happened were invisible. He felt the same to me, to hug and to hold. His whole body was a familiar mountain I'd climbed and conquered so many times in our lives that until that night had felt vast, but it suddenly felt so fleeting." I loved that so much. I felt like that was really both thought-provoking, because I like how Magnolia is reflecting on her life with this boy, this man now. I mean, they're adults. She's like 23, I think he's 25 when we're reading this. But I also loved how she had this moment where she's thinking about how familiar he is to her and how she finds so much solace in him, thinking that he'll always be there. And then she has this thought that maybe this is fleeting after all. I just loved it. I thought that this little bit of this book said a whole lot about her feelings, and I felt like she didn't overly describe it. You know what I mean? And I loved that so much. So there is also a lot of clothing descriptions, brand name descriptions, which is definitely not my thing. Like, I really don't care about designer name brands or anything like that, but it is an integral part to the character. I do think that that could have been pared down a little bit. This book is long, and I don't know that it needed to be that long, because largely what's making it long is things that are described that have already been described that maybe don't need to be described. But I still really enjoyed it. It's a solid 4-star read for me. I was surprised at how much I enjoyed it, because usually this probably wouldn't be my thing, and I think that really hangs, everything about this book for me hangs on the writing. And whereas at the beginning, this is something else I noticed, I'm sorry, this video is definitely getting very long. When I started reading this book, I noticed a lot more of the run-on sentences, the lack of commas, the overly descriptions, the same descriptions that we kept hearing over and over again, the metaphors in every single paragraph. And the metaphors really never stopped, and the I descriptions never really stopped. But I did notice that from the first of this book to the end of the book, it started to get more cohesive, it started to get more concise. The writing definitely seemed to tighten up as the book got longer, and I found that to be very interesting, because usually you will get that in the first few chapters and the rest of the book isn't edited as tightly. And I think that that is interesting, not only because it's very unique for this type of a book, but also I think that says a lot to the fact of how much her writing was able to grow from the beginning of this book to the end of the book. And I think that's pretty impressive. So yeah. Do I think this book is worth the hype? I do, honestly. I think it's very unique. I think that there are no other books like this that I have found in romance. It definitely is dramatic. It feels to me very much like an elevated soap opera. Like when I was talking about books recently, I'm like, it's very soapy, but it's that fun type of soapy. Like this feels like that, the same type of like drama, high drama, soapy, but like an elevated soapy, and I just found it really enjoyable. So yeah, I liked it a lot. Do I recommend it? I mean, I think a lot of people are going to like this, but I think equally a lot of people are going to hate it. You know? I think that if you are not wanting to read about the drama that's in here, you're not gonna like it. And I also feel like the writing could be a stumbling block for some people. So, I don't know. I enjoyed it. It's messy. It's toxic. it has the potential to be beautifully written. There were parts of this that were beautifully written. Some of it was also overwritten, but again, very impressed with this author and her talent, and excited to continue on in the series. So let me know what you thought about this very long review. This didn't end up being short at all. Apparently I had a lot to say. Let me know what you thought about this. If you plan to read it or whatever, I'd love to know your thoughts. And if you have read it already, let me know if you agree or disagree. And yeah, thanks so much for watching, my friends. Please feel free to leave me a B emoji, and I'll see you all in my next video.